What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Rock and Roll Gypsy Diaries. I am your rock and roll gypsy in charge, Andi Thunders, and I am here with my good friend David Smith of Gypsy's Kiss once again. And we're here to have a discussion panel about the Beatles and their influence on our lives and the different perspectives from different generations as well as fans. How are you, man?
I'm good, Andy. And one of the many things we have in common musically is this love of the Beatles.
Yeah, and it's something that's been passed down from generation to generation to generation for the last almost, 60 years we're bridging on.
And the different perspectives, as you said, is that I lived through Beatlemania.
And I've lived through I don't know if it's an insult to call it almost, I guess, regurgitations, but I mean, it's been passed down from generation to generation, whether directly or indirectly. I can remember my grandmother when I was like 7, when I had first gotten, or maybe I was a little older, but I had had the Beatles 1 CD when that came out. So I'd already had an inkling and had been into them. And then when I got to be a teenager around 12 or 13, my grandmother gave me, and I still have it, the original US Capitol mono of Rubber Soul, which has an entirely different track listing than what is the standardized version, which is the British version.
It does. And allegedly, one reads that the British track listing was what the Beatles wanted.
Yes. And that's why it's become standardized. And it's unfortunate because at the same time, some of their US albums that have been out of print since like 2004, when they put the CD box sets out with the original US Capitol releases, it kind of sucks because it's almost like a revision of history in a way, because those are some of the best-selling US records of all time.
Yeah.
As far as like how they impacted us in the US was a bit different than over in the UK, because what set them alight over here was I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yes.
And it was a song, where over there they had to build from the biker jacket look to the lovable mop tops, and it became more of a cultural thing that they started to envelop, where over here it was just a song.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I suppose the same for the States and also in the world with the UK invasion of the early 60s.
And it's funny because it reintroduced music to America that was American that we ignored.
Well, that's really
political reasons.
A lot of British music is, and however good it's been with the most iconic bands, is ultimately reintroducing American music to America.
The Rolling Stones, the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles were doing girl group songs, Little Richard songs, stuff that was labeled race records over here.
I mean, pretty much every band in the early 60s, their influences were either blues, like the Stones and many others from American
Birds.
They were either jazz, or they were the sort of, Buddy Holly style. I'll call it pop, which is really putting it down, but for
back then it was.
And that's the Beatles' roots, Buddy Holly.
Yeah, and I'd say from the fact that the Beatles did a lot of waltzes and stuff, that there might have been a little bit of jazz in there, especially in their later stuff. You can hear that, I think, more. But I mean, they were just absorbing it all because they didn't have, and people forget, this was still when segregation was a thing in the United States. And that wasn't a concept over there for you guys.
Yeah.
And it's
sort of, for those who didn't, I'm not just saying didn't live through the time, but are very much later to getting into Beatles music. They were only together 7 years.
And they did so much.
Rolling Stone were together as a band for 7 years. And some of those years they weren't really together at all. They wrote separately and recorded separately. And here's the Rolling Stones just celebrating their 60th year.
Yeah.
So it was an awful lot.
And you got to give respect to them. And, all due respect to Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman and all their past members, but they've got a resilient energy about them. And as long as they're still Mick and Keith, it's still the Stones, in my opinion.
Well, I'm a big Stones fan. I guess you are as well. But
the
the current Stones are like a Stones tribute band. But they're the original members doing it. They play the Rolling Stones, but they're the right people to do it.
Well, honestly, they're one band that I've never gotten to see that I would love to be able to see if I could somehow be able to afford a ticket in the foreseeable future. I would probably go see them just to check that off my list. You know what I mean?
I've seen the Stones a few times, and now it's so. And now it's hideously expensive to do it because they're such a massive worldwide act. They're playing in Hyde Park in London in the summer. I'm thinking, do I want to? It's like every time Bob Dylan comes over to UK, I have to go and see him because I assume he'll pass away sometime, and I'll.
I need to see him too.
Yeah, and it's sort of I thinking, do I want to go and see the Stones because they might not play anymore? But I'll think about it.
Yeah. And it's crazy because all of this stuff didn't really start to catch until the Beatles kind of broke into literally everywhere.
Just to own up to my age, Andy, which I was 8 when "Love Me Do," which was the first track released in UK, came out, and so at the beginning of my personal musical journey, which the Beatles have so heavily influenced, because there it came, this music out of nowhere. And that was my first hearing of them, and it became to me, and indeed to my generation, and almost like I say everyone around me, it was a phenomenon. Suddenly everybody was interested in, and not just teenagers, but mums and dads as well, was popular music. And if there hadn't been, I say to people now, who are refused nicks about the Beatles' influence, I say, well, look, tell me 3 bands you like, and they'll come up with them. And I say, well, no Beatles, they wouldn't have existed. Because
you look at every band from the last 50 years, they've all been influenced by the Beatles. I mean, Enough's Enough, for example, just put out a Beatles, reinvention covers album that was really good.
I've seen an interview a few times with Ozzy Osbourne where he cites the Beatles as his most favorite band by miles.
I think he's even said that John Lennon and Paul McCartney are like his 2 rock and roll heroes, like of all time. And honestly, when you look at some of the stuff he did on his own and songs like Dreamer, and really his vocal approach too, I hear a lot of the John Lennon kind of that whine, that, tormented soul kind of whine that John Lennon had, that Bob Dylan has. And when you realize what the Beatles were and what they did, and you look at all the artists influenced by them, you can pick up on where, okay, right there's the Beatles influence, especially as a musician. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Andy, you're the interviewer and I'm the interviewee, but let me switch roles for just a moment and ask you the impossible question. Favorite Beatles single, favorite Beatles album, and why?
Oh,
it's an impossible question, isn't it? And I will attempt to do the same.
Oh man, my favorite single would probably be The Ballad of John and Yoko. Was Old Brown Shoe the B-side to that?
It was the B-side in UK, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because I would be talking about the UK, because I think that wasn't issued over here until the Hey Jude or the Beatles Again, which had all the cuts that didn't make it over here. Because both of them are on that record, and that's where I first heard them, actually. Just because I'm a big John Lennon fan, and I always was. It's not something I try to hide or anything. And being a rocker and growing up and having certain elements of my upbringing, I can relate to what he's singing about in regards to him and Yoko and how their relationship was viewed, just by me being myself before I came out about anything, was a struggle. The way things are going, they're going to crucify me. I can't tell you how many times that rings in my head still to this day as a working stiff adult, let alone a kid who's trying to navigate and figure out who the hell he is. And I think that it's one that is really overlooked, but it's a really great, fun song. And it's not what I expected by The Ballad of John and Yoko, reading the title. It's really upbeat and sarcastic and, you know, almost early punk rock in a way, by the way he's just blatantly calling people out for being kind of shitty towards him, you know, when he's not hurting anybody.
And here it was their last number one, but almost their last single. So, you know, to that point, it was almost like looking back on all the things that happened to him, what the press thought, what people thought, and saying, well, look, I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a big middle finger to like all the establishment that suddenly when he does what he actually wants to do, then they're like, whoa, you changed. I don't like it anymore. You know, you're no longer the She Loves You. Yeah. They were thinking about real shit, but I admire that. And I don't know why, but some of my favorite recordings and albums are always at a tentative, hard, or like right at the breakup time. I don't know why. I'm always entertained. I like Mob Rules better than I like Heaven and Hell. One of my favorite Kiss record is Creatures. I don't know why I like albums that are written in such weird times, because usually the music's a little different because it's under that strain. But that's no different for the Beatles. If I had to pick a favorite record, fuck. If we're talking UK or US, that's really hard, because my favorite US record is the US Rubber Soul. But it's like there's that, and then there's Let It Be. Those are like struggling to fight for the top spot always.
Yeah, I think, you know, you and I have discussed Beatles before, and the track listing of Rubber Soul is different in UK than it.
A lot of their early records were, yeah.
And it's the impossible question, because, you know, we could go different day. What's your favorite Beatles single?
And it could change.
And I'll pick a different one.
Yeah.
And I love them all, as you do. I think the one I single rather than album track, I always go back to is Hello Goodbye.
That's a good one.
Open sort of psychedelia. And the other reason is the flip side here of Hello Goodbye was I'm the Walrus.
Oh, yeah. And that's, oh, man, that's one of my top 5. It has to be. And that always stays.
Yeah.
I'm such a John Lennon fan, and I don't know why. I have no justification. There's just something about his honesty and his voice that just, I don't know, always. But I Am the Walrus is such a surrealistic painting, but yet you kind of can feel the message he's trying to get in a way. I don't know.
Here, at least, that was released on the Magical Mystery Tour EP.
Yeah, and that's the only US album release that's become the standardized version that they've put out for remaster and in print.
And I remember it so well because the Magical Mystery Tour was a release on Boxing Day 1967 as a TV special. And I watched it, you know, on black and white TV, because what we had then, and it was I'm sure I must have watched it with my parents then, who were expecting sweet and cuddly Beatles being, you know, the lovable mop tops, and suddenly saw something very different, you know, which was almost a surreal experience, and it was meant to be.
Yeah.
But that whole program and that whole EP here, I think
I think it's one of their finest works. I like it a little bit better than Sgt. Peppers. I listen to it more than I do Sgt. Peppers, and that's no slight, because Sgt. Peppers, for its time and place, was perfect. Yeah. But Magical Mystery Tour seems like just a little notch higher in my book, personally.
So I sort of, you know, the impossible question. It might be Hello Goodbye. You're, you know, again back in the 60s and probably still now, you were either a Lennon fan or a McCartney fan, but it was hard to be. You know, it wasn't cool to be both, even though you had to. It was like going, well, do I like the Beatles or the Stones? And I was more of a McCartney fan because of the melody, and the melodies in the harmonies in that are just perfect. Absolutely. That's
the thing that's always influenced anything I've done musically. I like a sense of the raw emotional realness of John Lennon, but the balance of also having the melodic sense of Paul McCartney. And I think a lot of bands use that. Kiss, you know.
And even though, probably from 65, 60, probably from Rubber Soul onward, then the Beatles wrote and often recorded separately. So, McCartney would write a song and everything went out under the badge Lennon and McCartney, but it would be very much him. But, I've read, and you probably have as well, that they would still contribute little bits to each other's song.
Yeah, and we see that with Get Back.
They're killer lines too. They're and I've seen many examples of it. Absolutely killer lines that McCartney would have a perfect song, and John Lennon would change a line. It would change the whole song.
But it would make it that much better.
Absolutely.
That one little line makes all the difference. And being that I saw that Steve Morse has dropped out of Deep Purple for a bit to take care of his wife.
Wife's ill,
Yeah, I wish him all the best, and I think it's admirable the way Purple handled things like a true family. And I, watching the bonus disc to Infinite, watching Ian Gillan write with Bob Ezrin, as old men, but they're putting a song together and they're trying to Bob Ezrin's like, no, that last line needs to be like the punchline. It's got to be like the punchline of a joke. It's got to be a great line that's kind of humorous, but and they came up with it. So I had already seen that in an example. Well, when you get back, you can see who did what in a perfect display.
Other ones I like, Norwegian Wood, which is very much a John Lennon lament.
Yeah.
But the middle section is McCartney, and very McCartney, and the same for Day in the Life. It's a hard Lennon song, but the middle section is more upbeat, more McCartney, and it's a perfect combination.
Exactly. Yeah, those are two separate songs at one point, A Day in the Life.
Yeah.
And it was just joined together by what John Lennon said to George Martin. He wanted an orgasm of orchestra instruments, basically.
Yeah.
God damn. And I have to say, my favorite Beatles film of all time is Yellow Submarine. My kids love it. I still love it.
Andy, I was going to say that's the child in you coming out there, isn't it? Because it's magical animation, isn't it? And it's great songs. And
I'm a fan of animation, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I show anybody who's any kind of artist, because I'm a writer and stuff. Yeah. But knowing that they had to hand draw all of that frame by frame, because that was made in 67, it came out in 68.
Yeah.
I show people that just to okay, just, I don't even care if you don't like the music, just look at some of the artwork here and they're just like, oh my God.
And so that's much amazing. Of it, and so much in its time, it's psychedelia.
Yeah, but it makes it unique, and I think in hindsight now, maybe the band's a little bit more about it and stuff, and maybe it's been better received or whatever. I don't know that it was a flop to begin with, but
I think it was. I remember, because it was 1969 the film came out. I remember seeing it in the cinema and not being disappointed, but being slightly underwhelmed because it wasn't quite what I expected. But
at the same time, you have to admit, if you actually pay attention, there's so much great English humor in that film.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that children can enjoy and adults will enjoy, but for very different reasons.
Exactly. And it's not that it's inappropriate at all. It's just
it's humor of its time.
It's absolutely witty beyond. I think it's one of the. I think that dialogue is the most out there at times.
Yeah.
So
I asked you about your album choice. I flip between two. And they're both in my top 10 albums of all time, but it's and they're often number one or two. But the two I can't separate are Abbey Road and Revolver for very different reasons.
Revolver has grown on me a lot, probably because I heard the US version first. That's only got two John Lennon songs on it.
I think, to me, 1966, so I would have been 12. It was a revelation as an album.
It's got
the diversity of the Lennon George Harrison sitar inspired pieces. It's got the honey sweet McCartney melodies, and it's got some hard stuff in it as well. That
I really like.
Exceptional musically.
The thing I like about those two records, more so maybe Rubber Soul and this mention, but it's literally the one time where you can see in between the pop era and what became known as their psychedelia era.
Absolutely right.
Rubber Soul and Revolver are like, they kind of go together sort of in that way, because that's where they really started to get experimental.
I agree with you. Where in their journey and others did sort of psychedelic or substance fueled music start, I think it was with Rubber Soul.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell it clear as day.
Revolver to me is just a fantastic album, and Abbey Road I still play regularly. I mean, not that I don't know I do play, and it's an album. I don't know if you're the same, Andy, with other albums. It's an album I must listen to in its entirety and in the order.
Yes, I am a steadfast believer in listening to an album the whole way through.
Let me be an old man for the moment and say, the only thing I don't like, other than it doesn't pay me, of digital, the way music is delivered digitally now on Spotify or Apple or on Amazon, apart from that, I don't get much money out of it. It is that it just, everyone has a greatest hits playlist.
And that's what bothers me too.
Great tracks don't get heard, and for me, and it's the same with our albums. Actually, we put quite some attention to get them in the order, the tracks that we think they should listen. And but Abbey Road, more than anything else, it's got to be listened to in the order and in its entirety.
Yes. So great. I think it's kind of funny how our top two favorite records, mine's Rubber Soul US and Let It Be, and yours are Revolver and Abbey Road. They're like right. It's one record ahead.
The one different, and I Let It Be, which was their last album release, but was recorded before Abbey Road, has grown on me since.
It really, at first, I thought it was terrible. I kept listening back. Yeah. I like the album cut of Let It Be better because it's got that dirtier guitar solo by Harrison.
Yeah.
I love that. I actually like the Let It Be Naked release a lot better.
I was going to ask you about that because there's the two versions, both are great. There's the one that
both are great in their own right, but I can see
has Phil Spector all over it, with all that he would do. But the Naked album is just like 2 to 4 guys sitting there just playing.
And I can see elements where why, like the Long and Winding Road, I didn't like as much until I heard the Naked version.
Yeah.
So you can hear a lot more Billy Preston, and I can see, I like both versions, but I actually prefer the Naked version because that's how they wanted it to sound. And it's not just because I'm a Beatles fan and I want to make them happy by saying that. It's because legitimately those songs sound a lot better to me presented that way than they did Phil Spectorized.
Yeah. But I like you probably, I will listen to both and enjoy both because but I agree that
I've got an original gatefold with the red apple. I love it to death. It's one of my prized Beatles possessions,
Yeah. And I suppose the album that we haven't mentioned other than in passing that probably most other people would say is the iconic Beatles album, Sgt Peppers, and it certainly is.
I think a whole is great. I didn't understand that till I ingested some substances that they used while making it myself, and ever since then that's always been one of my favorites.
Yeah, it was a very, to me and to many, early introduction to a concept style album rather than an album of tracks.
There's some who get upset when the Beatles are said to have possibly influenced or helped ignite what became prog rock.
Yeah.
They did do a concept record that was a whole piece, you know. It wasn't just a collection of songs, which was different. I don't think anybody did that at that time before them.
No, I don't think necessarily the tracks were linked like they. Let's think of another concept album, Tommy, for example. That is an opera-esque, and the tracks are linked. The tracks on Sgt Pepper linked so much as they flowed into each other.
Mm-hmm.
It
sounded more natural.
You can't take out a sequence just to be heard like that, because that's the way.
Yeah.
That's the way it's presented. The White Album was always a bit of an enigma to me. When it came out, was that 68?
Yeah.
I remember now thinking back, and others, it wasn't, initially at least, particularly well received as an album, because it was very experimental in part. It was very raw in part. And yet, it still had some sugary, great single type songs like Obla Di Obla Da, You're Back in the USSR, things, the things that would be great radio play. But others.
Glass Onion.
One of my favourite tracks, the album, Glass Onion.
Mine
which apparently, isn't that a retort to. Isn't that a retort to I'm the Walrus?
Yeah.
Link between
Here's another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul.
Oh, yeah, I read they were written at the same time, and it was saved for an album.
I love the groove and the riffage in that song. I really do.
Yeah. When we did some gigs a few years ago, and occasionally we do it now. We put a few covers in, one because the audience like it, and if there's a link and it's something different. But we did we did Revolution.
Ooh, yeah.
And you sort of think, oh, the audience is not going to like this. They just go crazy for it. And I think a lot of people didn't even know what it was. and it almost makes an audience sit up and take note because of its power.
Well, it's a damn powerful song. So
yeah.
That's the one thing that everybody likes. Everybody shits on them. But if they ever sat back and listened to certain stuff objectively, they'd be like, Jesus Christ, It's always like, this is pretty hard for a Beatles song. It's like, well, they did hard shit a lot. It just wasn't all that they did. Helter Skelter, I think, was written to get back at Pete Townsend for saying The Who's My Generation or something was the loudest or most raucous rock song ever written or something.
Something like that, yeah. I think
some kind of quip like that. Paul McCartney's like, okay. Yeah. Like that's
so I think, if anybody isn't a Beatles fan like we are and is listening to this and hear us talking about how great it is,
we're nerds.
Listen to the White Album, and then listen to an earlier album that's made for radio, and just see
to with the Beatles that was done like 4 years prior, and realize that that's the same band 4 years later. Not 10 years, not 20, 4.
And it's how a band develops, from the order that they were here, from Beatles for Sale up to, say, the White Album, just how that music.
That gap is insane because of what they did. And they were still putting out like 2 records a year at least.
And 4 or 5 singles a year. And certainly here, you'll know in the States, and I don't, worldwide, others will know. Typically, Beatles singles weren't on an album; they were singles,
and they were the singles usually ended up on the records here.
Yeah, but they were something like Paperback Writer was just pulled out as a single, and Hello Goodbye was pulled out as a single. It's on your Magical Mystery Tour album, but it's just a single here. It's only ever been a single. Lady Madonna the same. They were just set as
some of those songs you're mentioning weren't released until, like I said, they put out that compilation Hey Jude, but that's because they were some of the later UK singles like Paperback Writer, Rain, Lady Madonna, Old Brown Shoe, About a Johnny Yoko. That's a lot of the Hey Jude record because they weren't actually released over here.
So we were something like 3 or 4 singles a year that all went to #1, and they're all like fantastically written, performed songs. And
They were all different.
I was going to say that, yeah, they're all incredibly different. Particularly from '65 onward, they were all very different.
One that I really liked was the double A side with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane.
Penny Lane.
So that showed you the two different sides of the Beatles with John and Paul, writing about a similar kind of, writing in a very similar vein, but writing two totally different songs.
Well, that was a double A side here, and we have quite a few double A sides. The other one I particularly liked that was a double A side is Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out.
That is a good pairing. Oh my God. Yeah. Day Tripper, that riff alone.
Yeah, apparently, this is speculation, that Day Tripper was written by Lennon as an insult to somebody who'd taken a trip once and would say, "Look, I know everything. I know everything about the world." This apparently was his.
It does sound like what they were accused of doing, which was writing about a prostitute.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I've always wondered that, because it seems very obvious more towards the prostitute than it does the I know everything. Maybe they combine the two. I don't know.
But we could sort of talk through every single and B side and find them A and B sides or double A's, just really different, but both fantastic in their musical construction and delivery, etc., etc. Perhaps one of the other things we should touch on, and you mentioned,
absolutely,
is favorite albums post Beatles by their members.
Yeah, we can do that.
Let me first go to the least obvious. And in the early 70s, I don't know if it was the same in the States and around the world, Ringo Starr suddenly became really popular. And It Don't Come Easy is still one of my favorite. I just love it as a song.
I am a Ringo defender and always have been. I like his last two EPs. I actually bought Zoom In on cassette. I think Ringo gets a lot of shit, but I've always liked the Ringo songs. I love Octopus's Garden.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I love his take on, Act Naturally. I always liked his style. I don't,
Well, you can't imagine with a little help, my friends, being sung by any of the other Beatles, because it wouldn't work.
Exactly.
It just wouldn't work without that delivery. Even though Joe Cocker did a
Joe Cocker changed it completely, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, and did it as a different song, and did it brilliantly. It's a different song.
Since we're mentioning covers, really quick, I'm gonna throw in one that blows my mind every time. Well, two real quick. Enough's Enough did a whole record called Hard Rock Night. Check that out.
Right, okay.
Because I am really impressed with that. The vocal harmonies along with the hard rock riffage. Their version of Eleanor Rigby blows my mind. Because to do that with a guitar, bass, drum format and make it workable and still have the same mood and keep the same melody is insane. But they did it. It's like the cruising down the street blaring it out of an old Cadillac kind of album. It's a hard rock take on Beatles covers. But they did solo Beatles songs too. And they did Cold Turkey, which I thought was a cool choice because that wasn't a hit. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other cover I really like was done by Ghost with their rendition of Here Comes the Sun. They made it very ominous and eerie sounding, but yet still pleasant in the same melody again. It's really different, but I like it.
It's almost a conversation for another day, Andy, isn't it? You just put that idea in my head now. Covers of Beatles songs that,
there's so many.
Almost as good. I mean, in the 60s, I always have to remember that. The Beatles album would come out and there'd be a rush from other artists to get hits out of covering album tracks. Like,
same thing with Bob Dylan, too.
Overlanders had a hit with Michelle. Marmalade had a hit with Obla Di Obla Da. And it was just everybody rushing for
Joe Cocker. That was one of his first hits, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah.
Over here, that's one of the iconic scenes in Woodstock, the film.
Woodstock, yeah.
but absolutely, I'm all up for those future episodes. But Ringo, I've always loved. His output's been spotty, I think, but
yes, and he's still told, he still turns up and guests in other things. Yeah,
he did a lot of acting too, and I did not know he narrated Thomas and Friends, the TV
show. He was the narrator of Thomas the Tank Engine here in the first series, and of course he was in The Magic Christian with
that was on PBS over here. I used to watch that when I was little, and I had no idea it was Ringo, but it makes sense for Ringo to do that.
And at the risk of really irritating drummers, which I'm not, I think he's a great drummer. And you hear, like, drummers I admire hugely, when they're asked who's the best drummers ever, the top 5 typically has
Ringo in there somewhere. Yeah. What's that quote? A producer asked him to use a metronome. He said, "I am the fucking metronome."
I am the metronome. And
he is.
And I don't think, I'm not a drummer, so I'm talking as a music lover. I don't think it's technical ability, it's feel, touch, it's just
exactly
something different into a song that, however that came about is,
anybody who doubts his ability needs to listen to The Word from Rubber Soul. His groove keeps that song feeling so loose, but it's so goddamn tight and precise. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know what it is about that song, but it's just powerful, and it's all down to his beat and the way he's got that groove locked in.
Because I can be very boring and sort of anal about these things. You listen to podcasts here and people talking about music, and there's one where, a guy periodically is going through Beatles tracks and how they were, and he hooked on one I was listening to the other day, Tomorrow Never Knows, great song. And Ringo Starr's contribution to that, which is, again, I'm not a drummer, but certainly far from a 4/4 beat. It's really quite intricate and drives the song along.
Because I'm not a drummer either. I tried to play along to Rock and Roll All Night by Kiss, and I know what the different things do and what you're supposed to do, but I couldn't get it because
the band don't like it when I pick up a tambourine, let alone, in case I put them all out of time or something. But so on
at the wrong time.
So on, I suppose let's work in the reverse order, as many people would see, but not me. George Harrison, I think All Things Must Pass, an iconic album that will never be forgotten. I mean, even if he wasn't a Beatle, it's just a wonderful piece of work.
It really is. And the other album by George that I got on cassette when I bought a John Lennon tape that's out of print called Shaved Fish. I got it for free from the seller. He included it, and I'm glad. And they're all restored. They sound beautiful for cassettes that are 30 years old, 40 years old. Cloud 9. I think that is a really great record. There's some really good songs on that. Like, he's such a...
My other influences, Harrison records, although not strictly just him, very much in my era, before you were born, Andy, and many others, I thought, was Concert for Bangladesh. Together, and live album. But just some of the work in that is just, it had royalty at the time of musicians playing on it. But in my view, Harrison links it all together. And in the same way, I'm going years forward now, not everybody's taste or not everybody's cup of tea, as we say here, was Traveling Wilburys, and
I love them.
You just hear that, and
it's really funny because I tell people, if you listen to Tom Petty and Bob Dylan do vocal harmonies, they have the same exact voice.
Yeah, I think the first album, they did 2, didn't they? Was just phenomenal, and Jeff Lynne is a genius.
There were so many hits on that too. There's not a bad track. They're all stellar. Like, it's the one time where a super group didn't let you down. using
to your point you just made there is a band that includes Jeff Lynne, a phenomenon of musician, Tom Petty, who I'm a massive fan of, Roy Orbison, possibly one of the best vocalists ever.
Yes.
Bob Dylan and George Harrison, and Dylan and Petty are singing backing vocals. And Jeff Lynne is doing
Handle with Care. That's such a
Handle with Care. And it's like Handle with Care particularly is like, in my view, maybe what the Beatles would have been doing if they fast forward a few years.
If John wouldn't have gotten shot, I can guarantee you we would have seen the Beatles do something similar to what the Traveling Wilburys did, without a fucking doubt.
And I think, that's the enduring musically sort of George Harrison influence. Now, on what many would say is the principal two Beatles, and McCartney, I'll leave your favourite till last here, because I know you're a John Lennon man.
I do like Paul McCartney, and I do own several solo records. So
I probably have them all, and I think Wings was a far better project than many people gave credit to. I think some great
agree.
Stuff.
I love Venus and Mars.
Absolutely. That's brilliant.
A stellar record.
And Band on the Run is still in many people's top 10 of all time. It's one of the biggest sellers in UK still.
Yeah.
There's nothing on it I don't like. But my favourite McCartney is one of his second album, I think, which is Ran. And there's not a thing on that I don't love.
That's a really good record too.
Genius.
I really like his first solo, the McCartney 1 record.
Yeah.
I actually like that record. The second one I'm a little iffy on, obviously. I did get the third on cassette, and I really like that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard any of that one, but yeah, I would have to say Venus and Mars would definitely be my favorite Wings album, personally.
And I think McCartney, Ram is mine. It came to that time in my life, I think, was it 71? I was 17, and I just
the early 70s have a certain unique magical aura to them, the records that came out in the early 70s.
Yeah. And well, let me ask you about them, because 9 people out of 10 would say Imagine, I guess.
I'm gonna say either Plastic Ono Band or Sometime in New York City for me.
Yeah.
I think Plastic Ono Band leans more towards the top spot. It's so totally different than what the Beatles were doing. It's so raw and stripped back. It's John, Ringo, and Klaus Vaughan. It's very caustic, and it's John at his most honest and most vulnerable, I think, honestly. And he's dispelling everything, and just, it's almost like a emotional and spiritual purge of a record. And I feel like I can listen to songs like Well, 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 and those really heavy, screamy, dirty. Yeah. I can hear where Kurt Cobain was such a big John Lennon fan, and that's been documented and talked about times over. And I love that era of music too. And it's like, I can clearly hear, because Kurt used to scream until his voice cracked, and that's exactly what John was doing all over this record. But it's so beautiful, and it's so honest, and it's got so many different aspects to it. And I think it's a piece of art, because it always hits me in the feelings every time I hear it, no matter how often I hear it.
You mentioned Klaus Vaughan there, which is sort of an interesting, because he punctuates a lot of the 60s and music scene, and particularly Beatles.
I did the album art for Revolver, which is one of their best.
I'm going to say that. I've read or heard over the years that he was taught bass by Stuart Sutcliffe, or rudimentary bass. He did the artwork, fantastic artwork on Revolver, and he ended up playing for Manfred Mann, who certainly is in a UK band had 4 or 5 number one singles in the later 60s.
Absolutely.
So people that bounced off the Beatles and gone on to do great things through their influence or their association with them. Yeah,
and Sometime in New York City, probably for a lot of the similar reasons, but looking at history and what was going on at the time, how pungent and full of venom those songs are, but he's speaking the truth. That's the thing that I admire about that record. It is spotty, I'll give it that, but I feel in the Beatles solo career after they all split, John's is so limited, and we might look at it through rose-tinted spectacles, no pun intended.
Yeah.
When it comes to his career because of how he died and how cut short it was, there is some crap in his catalog, but I think the highest points of John's solo work and his high points are higher than any of the other Beatles solo output. And it's not a denigration. It's just, I think the highs that John achieved are much higher creatively. You mentioned Imagine, you
I
could
think
put
I
that
would
up
say,
against anything else, and it's hard to be able to say, no, I think I like Flaming Pie better. Like,
I agree. A couple of things you said that I agree with. One, his work post Beatles, because it was just limited to us, 10 years.
I love that he
At
took
that
time
moment,
off to raise Sean, but it's sad
his
in
life
hindsight.
changed in that. But his solo work and a lot of his Beatles work is more diverse than any of the others.
Yeah. Number 9 Dream.
Yeah.
That song is so great. And it's like, I'm almost like, is this like 70s soft rock that I'm listening to and loving and singing along to? Like, but it's got that melody, and that there's something about his surrealism that draws you in. I don't know what it is. It just does. You immerse yourself and bask in it.
Yeah. So here's another. It's good to quiz a younger Beatles fan, actually, because this is quite enjoyable for me. So who would you say, if anyone, was the fifth Beatle?
George Martin.
Yeah, because the term is used a lot, isn't it? Who's the fifth Beatle? Is it Brian?
There's several different people who could be quoted as that, but I think in the grand scheme of things, if you're going to pick a fifth Beatle, you know, um, in the way that we view who were the Beatles and who would be the fifth Beatle, it's got to be George Martin. It has to be.
The three contenders, if that's the right term, Brian Epstein, because it was not musical. Yeah. He was not a musician, he was musical. But he took them from aspiring to world superstars.
He saw what nobody else saw in them.
Yeah, absolutely. And and like some like artists now have artistic directors and managers who are far more hands-on. He was in that. This is what you'll wear. This is what your look will be. This is how you're going to become successful. Yeah. And I'll go at the other end. Much later in their career, but a lot of people refer to Billy Preston would have been a fifth Beatle because his contributions, albeit quite limited.
The only musician who's ever been co-credited on a Beatles album.
A good fact. That's absolutely right. Yeah, and I agree. George Martin came from. I'm sure you're as aware as George Martin as many are, but
a classical background.
He was, and he did comedy records for EMI. So when you do
such an odd pairing, but I don't think they could have accomplished what they did.
I think not either, because he was a quite gifted pianist and arranger, and did the orchestration. Still, the others learned.
For someone who would have been considered an old man or a square at the time, he could see what they needed to make it tick, even if it wasn't his type of music. He loved them.
I heard something in thinking about us doing this discussion today, and I read something that, and it must have been sometime in the middle or late 60s, they were doing a show, it was a TV show, and whether it was the All You Need Is Love, whatever it was, they asked George Martin to come and play on it, and and he wouldn't do it for the reason you said. He said he didn't want to look like an old man, with a young band. He didn't want to do that. He was content to be as instrumental as he was. He wasn't really in the background because he did so much, but he didn't want to be center stage with it. Wasn't what he did.
Yeah. No, I just it's just funny because when you look at the dynamic and where he came from and where the Beatles came from, you would have thought there's no way in hell that those two could work together, but they.
Well, let this this is 2022 now. I do some home recording. I've got a studio upstairs here. I have limitless tracks, but typically 64, 128. All these Beatles classics were done on 4-track.
Yeah.
And now when do they get 8-track? Probably not.
They had outdated technology that I think was developed in the late 40s or early 50s that they were using for up until I think the White Album.
I think up until Sgt Pepper White Album, I think they then went from 4 to 8-track maybe.
But still, 8-track back then was still pretty limited.
Well, it was still limited to tape that could denigrate and do all sorts of. But just it's like you say now. Just how could that technology produce such wonderful things that we got all this now? We can.
The first 2 or 3 records were done live on before Christmas in 12-hour sessions.
We had
every single piece of those records. That's what blows my mind about the early stuff.
I must dig it out on YouTube. I haven't seen it for years, but certainly over here, about maybe 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, some big bands of the day, biggish bands, were asked to go into Abbey Road and re-record some of the Sgt Pepper songs on that technology.
Wow.
And, they're great musicians, great band. But are you familiar with Kaiser Chiefs?
Yeah.
There's quite a number of hits here. They were one, and Ricky Wilson was very honest. They tried to do Sgt Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, the intro and outro, and they said, we just can't do it.
You can't do it on 8 tracks.
We just can't do it. We can't do it because the challenge was to not absolutely replicate it, but that's what they were all trying to do.
Yeah.
But given the limitations of the technology, and the end result of all of this, it just sort of promoted the producers and Beatles' art in doing that.
Yeah.
I must dig it out. It was a fascinating series. Some made a good. I'm trying to think who else was on. I think
if you could find a link to whatever this was, I'd love to see.
They were big bands. I think the Stereophonics on it. I can't remember, but I remember the Kaiser Chiefs thing because they put their hand on their heart and said, "No, can't do it. Just can't do it."
And you got to respect that. When you realize that the modern top bands are unable to replicate that on the technology that the Beatles used.
I will look for it. I must be able to find it somewhere. And if I do, I'll send you the link and you'll enjoy it as a piece of,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We'll have to, when I get over there, we'll have to do the Beatles tour in Liverpool.
Well, I was going to say to you, we're sort of coming to the end of our slot here. When you do come over to England, and I'm sure you will, you need to do the Beatles. Liverpool Beatles is quite commercialized now. Why wouldn't it be? Tours, bus tours, hotels. I've done it on my own. Well, I've just gone around in a car or on a bus or something. It's some of the iconic places, and it's just wonderful. But there's a London Beatles tour, and one of the things you would really enjoy is walking across the crossing for Abbey Road.
Yes,
as everybody does, by the way.
It's on my bucket list actually to get my picture taken crossing Abbey Road with.
There is a queue of people that go to do it every day. Just to.
You'll have to bring some guys from Gypsy's Kiss, and we'll take a photo.
We'll do it as four of us in different orders coming and being and being photographed on the iconic zebra crossing.
That would be perfect. I do have to renew it, but I do subscribe to the British Beatles fan club, so some of that stuff I can get a discount or get in for free.
Yeah.
But that just shows my hardcore fandom right there.
It does, isn't it? Well, it would definitely not want to miss Liverpool out of any tour you do here. I'd say to anyone else who's not been to.
Yeah, because I know it's not the original, but I know the Cavern Club.
The Cavern is about both in Matthew Street, but they are 30, 40 yards apart. It's a different building, but it's a reconstruction in a different building.
Okay. But it's like right next to where it used to be. Basically.
Oh yeah, you just close your eyes and you're back in 1952, and it's great. But the other things, because I think McCartney's house is now part of our National Trust. It's
his childhood home.
And I think George Harry, you go to all their houses where they grew up.
I'm pretty sure John's was long ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was in Menlove Avenue. I'm stretching my memory now.
Wasn't his Aunt Mimi's house declared a national
Right.
trust
Yeah,
years
that's
ago?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like that. Close your eyes, and I'm back there again, and it's just
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean,
tunes going through your head.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I guess that kind of wraps this up pretty nicely. I mean, the Beatles are just one of those bands that existed for such a short time in the terms of the world and the universe and humankind, but for the last almost 60 years, they've continued to influence generation after generation. Just look at both of us. There's older and younger fans.
And will continue to do so.
Yeah, there's some kind of magic to it.
Well, I'm like you, happy to talk Beatles and 60s music generally, actually, but Beatles specifically with anybody, because it's my growing up era, and it's
yeah.
I think I said to you before, but not since we started this, that there were 3 Beatles
We'll have to
songs.
do a Sid Barrett episode sometime.
Oh, absolutely.
I love Sid Barrett as well. He's one of my
about Floyd as well, but that's for another occasion.
Yes.
But on the very first, Gypsy's Kiss gig, I've said to you this before, Andy, in 1974, with Iron Maiden's Steve Harris on bass, we had 3 Beatles songs in the set. So anyone who wants to argue that heavy rock, metal is entirely dissociated from Beatles, I would argue strongly against it.
John Lennon did this in 1967.
Yeah.
Saying.
Andy, this is a pleasure, my friend. It's always good to talk music with you.
Always here too, because
My final compliment: your musical knowledge is beyond your years, if you don't mind me saying that.
I do not mind. I was a kid, and I think the first rock biography I read was in 6th grade, and it was "Walk This Way" by Aerosmith. And
all right, okay.
Talk about a seedy introduction to how rock was. Reading about guns and heroin and groupie stuff.
Yeah.
My English teacher actually picked it up off my desk one day. I just went to a random page and started reading it. I'm like, oh shit. I didn't get in trouble.
Yeah, and so my last point on that is that when I was 8 and 9 years old, first listening to "Love Me Do" and "Please Please Me" and "From Me to You" and "She Loves You," which were sequentially the first ones that were released here. Until the Beatles were accepted wholly mainstream, and you listen to some of those songs now. How on earth could my parents and my school teachers think they were anarchic? How on earth could they think about that? And a lot of it was, they had long hair, and therefore they must be sort of, communists or revolutionaries or something.
Yeah. And I just want to say, from an American perspective, and I don't care, I'm going to just come out with it. When I got into the Beatles and expressed my love for John Lennon and mentioned that to my father, okay? He's one of those Reagan Republican guys. Okay?
Yeah.
Imagine is a communist manifesto, and I can quote that from my father. This is modern times we're talking about. This was when I was a child. I'm 30. I'm not like, but I just want to put that in perspective, that stuff still exists over here.
It was, and a sort of last thing for me on this, Andy, you may have heard this before, and this may involve me doing some sort of Mick Jagger impression, but because Stones had even longer hair, didn't they, back in the 60s, and there they were, longer than other bands, aspiring bands.
Yeah.
And allegedly, I think this was in his book that people would shout, "Why don't you get your hair cut?" And his reply was, "What, and look like you?" That and the greatest response, wasn't it? Just sign of the times.
It reminds me of like the one quote from one journalist who attended a very early Sex Pistols gig, where someone in the audience went, "You can't play," and Johnny Rotten goes, "So what?"
Yeah. Exactly. The perfect reply. Who cares? So what?
It's the same kind of sentiment. So
Well, so in the summer of in our summer holidays here away from school, I had grown what was purported to be like a Beatles cut in 1963 and 4. It was just on my collar. Look at it now, mine's like yours.
Yeah,
exactly. And it was just on my collar. I was sent home from school to don't come back until it's cut. Yeah, you mustn't look like those revolutionaries at 10 years old.
I think in high school, Johnny Rotten had this long hair, and I think I saw the Filth and the Fury film by Julian Temple, which he's a great artist and director in his own right. The image scrolls over and says the haircut that got me kicked out of Saint whatever Catholic school it was. And it's funny because this image is him doing his sneer with the big bug eyes, but he's got this long hair like as long as mine. And next to it is that caption, and it just cracks me up every time I rewatch that.
While we're talking about Johnny Rotten, I saw the Sex Pistols' very first gig ever.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know who they were. I went to see, I don't know if you...
St. Martin's College, 75, right?
Well, maybe I saw them at an all-nighter at the Lyceum in London, and they were supporting, of all bands, the Pretty Things.
Oh, wow.
I played the Pretty Things, but there's, can you imagine two bands different?
At that time, they were considered enemies.
First, and I was probably in that you can't play category, but do you know when you look at them, they had a core audience of about 50 just in front of them screaming. And I remember thinking then they're going to be something, whether I like it or not. I look back fondly on the Sex Pistols, but I hated it at the time because it broke up the sort of music I loved.
Yeah.
I look back on it now and think, well, thank God, that happened.
Yeah, it's the same thing that happened in the late 80s with grunge for me, or the evil G word, in my opinion. All those bands were diverse but lumped together just like punk, because the Damned didn't sound like the Pistols, and Crass didn't sound like the Exploited, and the Exploited didn't sound like Oi Polloi. Even as punk generated, they all had a unique sound and style, especially the early 70s stuff from New York was even more diverse. And it's funny that we're going to a topic like this with the Beatles, but literally these events that we're discussing that happened later are exactly what the Beatles did in the early 70s.
I made it for that point. The Beatles changed music, and back in here 70s, Sex Pistols changed. I didn't like it at the time, but I grew to love it now, and these things happen in music. And my last point on that, I can own up saying I also like the Ramones, by the way.
Yeah, well, how can you not?
Yeah, I find that for all their foibles and what they were, it still grabs me now. I find it joyous just to listen to, because it's just however simple it is.
When you learn they hated each other 99% of the time.
Yeah.
That's the other crazy part to think about, because they were such a chaotic unit. They were literally chaos, but they functioned. You would have never known that they hated each other. Yeah,
I'm sure another series we must research is great bands who really hated each other. There'll be some some great contenders to that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, some of the best groups in history. Maybe I could bring another guest on for an episode like that to have a third perspective too, in different bands that we may not come up with.
That would be great. That'd be great, Andy. A real pleasure to see and talk to you again, as ever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure with you, man. I hope to get some new music heard soon. And I hope that you all stay healthy and enjoy your tour. And
I'm remastering our first album at the moment.
Nice.
And putting some acoustic versions on it as bonus tracks. So that hopefully people like that. That's interesting. We'll see.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Great to see you.
Oh yeah, take it easy. Cheers.
And love to your family and all your friends.
Oh yeah, same to you. All my best.
Cheers, friend.